Democrats closer to impeaching the president today than they were yesterday?
I don't think we're farther away from impeaching the president.
No collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination, and no obstruction. They said
They didn't say no obstruction.
Well, don't make Robert Mueller into a saint. If you think he's going to save the day, you're wrong.
Despite rumors that Puerto Rico's governor, Ricardo Rosselló, would resign today, caving to the demands of hundreds of thousands of protesters, his press secretary issued a statement saying the governor is, quote, in a process of reflection and of listening to the people, though the people probably feel like they've already made their demands loud and clear. The Federal Trade Commission announced a settlement with Facebook for violating its users' privacy, including a $5 billion fine and mandating a new independent privacy committee on the company's board. Critics argue the settlement doesn't go far enough. CEO Mark Zuckerberg and other executives aren't being held personally liable, and the company doesn't have to change its business model of monetizing user data. And while the agency is touting the settlement as one of the biggest in U.S. history, $5 billion isn't too much for a company that made $56 billion last year. Hours before 3 abortion laws were set to come into effect in Arkansas, a federal judge issued a 14-day injunction, saying the state's restrictions could cause women to, quote, suffer irreparable harm. The laws would have banned abortions after 18 weeks of pregnancy, as well as banning the procedure if it was requested solely because a fetus has Down syndrome. A third law would have required physicians to be board-certified OBGYNs, which would likely shut down the state's only surgical abortion clinic.
Thank you for putting your faith in me and giving me the chance to serve.
Shortly after Theresa May gave her final speech as Britain's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson gave his first.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, the people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy.
What's your message today, Mr. Mueller? Do you have any reluctance to testify today? What do you think?
For 22 months, you never commented in public about your work, even when you were subjected to repeated and grossly unfair personal attacks. Instead, your indictments spoke for you and in astonishing detail. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? So help you God. Let the record show the witness answered the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated.
2 House committees finally got their chance to press former special counsel Robert Mueller on his report. He wasn't inclined to help them.
I'll leave it with the report. I refer you to the report. I stand behind the report.
He already said the 400-plus pages were his testimony. Today, he refused to discuss parts of the report, citing a suggestion from the Department of Justice that he couldn't talk about anything that had been redacted or left out, including details on how the investigation started. Mueller wanted it that way. He didn't dispute the Attorney General's claim that it was Mueller himself who asked for those limits.
This is outside my purview. It's outside my purview. It's outside my purview.
You had 2 years to investigate what would be your
I'm not going to speak any more to it.
So you can't speak any more to it, but you're not going to agree with my characterization. Is that correct?
Yes.
Committee members questioned whether Mueller's silence was political.
You made a political case instead. You put it in a paper sack, lit it on fire, dropped it on our porch, rang the doorbell, and ran.
Some suggested that he was biased.
How many times did you cite the New York Times? How many times did you cite Fox News?
Credibility is always relevant. It's always material, and that goes for you, too.
And they tried, and failed, to stuff words into his mouth.
I'm not going to speculate. I think you're asking for me to speculate. I'm not going to speculate.
One representative did manage to get Mueller to say something new.
I'd like to ask you, the reason, again, that you did not indict Donald Trump is because of OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president, correct?
That is correct.
But in the next hearing, Mueller quickly backtracked.
That is not the correct way to say it. As we say in the report, and as I said at the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime.
In other cases, Mueller seemed to be unfamiliar with key elements of his sprawling report.
And you're on page 103?
103, that's correct, volume 2.
I'm not familiar.
One of the few facts that today's hearing was able to clarify, Mueller is 74.
Which president appointed you to become the United States Attorney for Massachusetts?
I think that was President Bush.
According to my notes, it was President Ronald Reagan had the honor to do so. Under whose administration?
My mistake.
Some committee members took Mueller's stonewalling as an opportunity for grandstanding.
Anyone else who did these things would be prosecuted for them. We must ensure that no one is above the law.
My Democratic colleagues were very disappointed in your report. They were expecting you to say something along the lines of, here's why President Trump deserves to be impeached.
Some tried to force America to pay attention to a report they mostly ignored.
Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Or they just tried to get in a few zingers.
You have no more power to declare him exonerated than you have the power to declare him innocent, Cooper.
And of course, viewers got that brand of flag-waving sycophancy one only finds on Capitol Hill.
As a former officer in the United States JAG Corps, the drafting and the publication of some of the information in this report frankly flies in the face of American justice. And I find those facts, this entire process, un-American.
You're the greatest patriot in this room today.
Eric Swalwell, a representative from California, sits on both the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. That gives him top billing in the Democratic cast of today's show.
So Intel is going to be consciousness of guilt.
Democrats are putting the final touches on their script last night. Okay, so this is the plan of attack. So there's two hearings, and the first one is which? Is Judiciary?
So Judiciary goes first, then, so 8:30. So early riser, this Mr. Mueller, right? And in California, as I think about my constituents, that's 5:30. So they're probably not going to watch this part, live.
So this plan of steps that you have to do in Intel, consciousness of guilt, destruction of evidence, false statements, this is stuff that came down from the leadership of the committee, and they told you, Eric, I want you to do this stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going through, the different people and the lies they told, and also matching it up with the indictments, right? I mean, you have 37, different individuals, who have been charged, and a lot of them were for false statements or obstruction of justice. So just kind of laying out what that means.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you.
The goal for Democrats was to recreate the day Mueller spoke for the first time after his report was released.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
He didn't say anything that wasn't in the report, but just saying it out loud put the report back on the front burner. So is the plan here to just kind of get him to read the report on TV? Like, is it helpful just to have him say it out loud?
This is America in the 21st century. Seeing is believing.
So the fact that this is actually going to be mostly retread is kind of the point.
Well, retread for the Washington crowd, not retread for most people that I know.
To make this go off as smoothly as possible, the Democrats rehearsed. Swalwell had to sprint through the halls of Congress to get from one committee's dress rehearsal to the next, where he literally practiced questioning a fake Robert Mueller. Is the person who's pretending to be Mueller, are they like being hostile to you, like not asking your questions or being like prickly or what?
Prickly, but also just very yes, no. And so, just preparing that, you could say, where does the sun set, the east or the west? And he could say, I'll refer you to my report. Just like being prepared that may be, what we encounter.
It sounds pretty hard.
Yeah.
The curtain rose at 8:30 this morning.
Director Mueller, thank you for your service, going all the way back to the 60s when you courageously served in Vietnam. Because I have a seat on the Intelligence Committee, I'll have questions later. And because of our limited time, I will ask to enter this letter into the record under unanimous consent and yield to my colleague from California, Mr. Liu.
Act 1 ended around noon. You yielded.
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
It's a team, and I'm going to get another shot. I'll have 5 more minutes on intelligence. And so, we saw we were kind of bumping up against time, and we wanted everyone to cover their parts. And so I covered a part that I'm comfortable with, which is former prosecutor.
The president tweeted about you. Did you see that?
I saw that, yeah.
What'd you think?
He should change the channel. He shouldn't watch so much TV, but, my wife was excited. I think, for her, she was waiting. She figured it was only a matter of time.
With that, Swalwell was off to Act 2, House Intel. Another round of scripted questions Democrats already knew the answers to, led this time by Committee Chair Adam Schiff.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
When he said it publicly, it was false?
He did say publicly that it was false, yes.
And when he told it to Putin, that was false too, wasn't it?
That I'm not familiar with.
Director Mueller, as a prosecutor, you would agree that if a witness or suspect lies or obstructs or tampers with witnesses or destroys evidence during an investigation, that generally that conduct can be used to show a consciousness of guilt. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So all this effort to go into this hearing, all the planning that was done for both these hearings, was it worth it?
I felt like it was worth it, especially when you look at someone who is really staying within the four corners of the report, that you really have to just kind of lead him with yes or no questions and be ready, if he doesn't know, to go, where that is in the report. And I felt like all of our members were prepared to do that. And so I felt like we did bring to life, a very complex 440 plus page report.
Are Democrats closer to impeaching the president today than they were yesterday?
I don't think we're farther away from impeaching the president.
But at a press conference with fellow Democrats after the hearings, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi let her party know. She remains unmoved.
My position has always been whatever decision we made in that regard would have to be done with our strongest possible hand. We have some outstanding matters in the courts.
The Republicans came into these hearings with their own plan, especially Jim Jordan, a fiercely conservative member from Ohio who was known for being combative in almost any hearing. 45 minutes before the hearing started, he and his team met for last-minute prep before Mueller's appearance in front of the Judiciary Committee. But Republicans have been telegraphing their line of questioning for days. Their plan: call into question the origins of the investigation into Russian interference in the election and related documents like the Steele dossier. In case you don't remember, the Steele dossier is the uncorroborated document that made its way to the FBI that alleged President Trump was compromised by the Russians. And it brought into our shared lexicon that delightful little phrase, P-tape.
You can confirm you're no longer...
The ranking member's opening statement set the tone for Republicans.
Russia meddled in the 2016 election, the president did not conspire with the Russian, and nothing we hear today will change those facts. But one element of this story remains: the beginnings of the FBI investigation into the president.
Now, Mueller knew all this was coming. He tried to preempt some of it in his opening statement.
I am unable to address questions about the initial opening of the FBI's Russia investigation, which occurred months before my appointment, or matters related to the so-called Steele dossier.
Trust me, Mueller's attempted preemption did not work. Republicans also wanted to highlight what they allege was the bias of Mueller's team, something the president liked to tweet about obsessively.
Most prosecutors want to make sure there's no appearance of impropriety, but in your case, you hired a bunch of people that did not like the president.
Jordan, who helped design the Republican strategy for today's hearing, used his time to stay focused on how the investigation started, and he was deep in the weeds of it.
Papadopoulos tells a diplomat Russians have dirt on Clinton. Diplomat tells the FBI. What I'm wondering is, who told Papadopoulos? How'd he find out?
I can't get into the evidentiary
Yes, you can, because you wrote about it. You gave us the answer. Page 192 of the report, you tell us who told him. Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud's the guy who told Papadopoulos. The mysterious professor who lives in Rome and London, teaches in 2 different universities. This is the guy who told Papadopoulos. He's the guy who starts it all. And when the FBI interviews him, he lies 3 times, and yet you don't charge him with a crime. And I'm curious as to why.
Well, I can't get into it, and it's obvious, I think, that we can't get into charging decisions.
Jordan didn't get an answer or a rise out of his witness, but he didn't have to. Since Mueller didn't really get into his conversations with Attorney General William Barr or even give more details about why he didn't come to a conclusion about obstruction, the best television today came from members, not Mueller, which allowed Representative Jordan to push the investigate the investigators narrative.
Okay, so what was your ultimate goal today? Not the entire Republican Party, it's just yours.
Underscore how important the investigation the Attorney General of the United States has given to John Durham, the one that they're doing to figure out how this whole thing got started. I always say, remember when Attorney General Barr first testified in front of the Congress 12, 13 weeks ago, he said 4 important things. He said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. He said spying took place. He said there's a basis for his concern about the spying that happened. And I don't care who you are, when he used the term unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance, if the FBI was engaged in that kind of stuff, that is very scary. And there's a lot of evidence that points to that they were. And I think those are important questions which Bill Barr is going to get the answer to.
But are they important questions to you because you were trying to invalidate the report or even what Bob Mueller was saying today?
No, they're important questions because you don't want this ever happening again in this country.
I understand this idea that the Attorney General should investigate how this got started, but that wasn't what Bob Mueller was tasked to do. He was tasked to figure out, was there Russian interference in the election? And the obstruction part became part of his task too. So why spend the time asking Mueller about this when we know, or we hope we get something from Barr about it?
It's important to know what the predicate was. It's important to know. You're doing an investigation. It's kind of important information to figure out, wait a minute, how do we get here?
Is there anything about Volume 2 of the report that gives you pause about obstruction? Did any of that worry you?
The thing that concerns me most, I'll be honest, in Volume 2 is that the burden of proof was flipped. The standard was inverted.
Bob Mueller didn't say he was guilty.
No, but he also said we didn't exonerate him. Prosecutors don't do that. That's not your goal. That's not your job. Your job is to determine whether you have probable cause that a crime was committed and charge the crime. They didn't do that. I like the president. I think he's doing a great job. But I know Democrats don't. And there are people in the country that don't. But you know what? Let's get past that now. We've had this hearing. We've been through this for 3.5 years. Let's figure out how it all started.
That's not getting past it. That's still rehashing it. And I'm not saying the Democrats aren't going to rehash this forever and ever, too. I'm just saying...
That's providing clarity and cleanup for concerns at the FBI. I think the American people are at a point where like, okay, let's move on.
Do you think they're done?
I think they'd like for us to actually address the crisis on the border. I think they'd like for us to address healthcare concerns. I think they'd like us to hopefully deal with some of the big issues that they think the United States Congress should be focused on.
Now, the president could have come out of the White House today and changed the subject to any one of those issues voters do care about. But as the day wound down, Trump did what he does, congratulated himself, and went back to his favorite lines.
There was no defense to this ridiculous hoax, this witch hunt that's been going on for a long time, pretty much from the time I came down on the escalator with our First Lady. Look, I think Robert Mueller did a horrible job, both today and with respect to the investigation. But in all fairness to Robert Mueller, he had nothing to work with. You know, you can be a builder, but if they don't give you the right materials, you're not going to build a very good building.
My name is Claire Winter. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. I have a tiny little business called Devotional Democracy. I was the creator of the original Robert Mueller devotional candle. In 2017, we had the inauguration. It had a real dire portrait of our country.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
And then later in the summer, we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The icing on the cake was in August. I got a text from a friend of mine at 7:38 in the morning, and she said, "Whatever you do, don't leave your house today." When the special counsel was appointed, here was this man, he had been the former head of the FBI, served, he was a decorated soldier. It turns out he'd gone to UVA law school, and he's Republican. So to have, this super educated, super accomplished person who didn't seem like he was given into political sway, that he couldn't be bought by power, it just gave me hope that maybe we could find our way. I guess somehow, my Catholic roots and the iconography kind of clicked in, and I thought to myself, someone needs to put a halo around that guy. I never set this up with the idea that I would make a lot of money selling Robert Mueller candles. I just thought other people might want one. Someone bought a candle, and I guess they liked it, and they wrote a review. Because one day I have nothing, and the next day my phone's on fire. I thought this was just a Christmas blip, but I kept getting sales into January. I got sales into February. I had sales into March. And then right as the William Barr letter came out, it stopped. And to be honest, they haven't picked up since.
The special counsel found no evidence that any American, including anyone associated with the Trump campaign, conspired or coordinated with the Russian government or the IRA in this illegal scheme.
I look at different news outlets and I'm trying to keep up. And I have come across a couple of Russia experts, and I kept hearing them saying, well, don't make Robert Mueller into a saint. If you think he's going to save the day, you're wrong. I kept thinking, but what do you mean? Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, what are my other options here? I have 2 Ruth Bader Ginsburg candles. They're longevity candles. So I am praying for her to have a long legacy and that she can live a very long time. And then I have an AOC candle to light and support her. And then I'm thinking about the next candle, and that's probably going to be along the lines of, be the hero we need now. The fact that we can't count on Robert Mueller, we can't count on just AOC or Ruth Bader Ginsburg to light our paths. We're going to have to come together as a community and as a country and get this party started. And it has to be on our terms, not hoping for a white knight to come along and save our democracy.